Let's talk about pronunciation. And when talking about pronunciation, we can think about the individual sounds that make up a language, or we can look at how these sounds combine together and how the emphasis or the pitch can change within words or sentences. So we're going to start with that, looking at pronunciation at word and sentence level. And in the next video, we'll talk about the individual sounds of English. So when talking about pronunciation at word or sentence level, there are three things to consider: word stress, sentence stress, and intonation. So word stress is the emphasis given to one syllable in a word, and every word with two or more syllables has word stress. This emphasis is the result of a syllable being slightly longer, slightly louder, and slightly higher in pitch. So in the word actually, the first syllable, ak, is stressed. In the word bilingual, the second syllable, ling, is stressed. Now this isn't unique to English. Lots of languages have word stress, but word stress patterns differ between languages, and a lot of the time in English, word stress can be quite unpredictable. So if we're teaching new words to students and focusing on the pronunciation, it can be useful to do some focus on word stress. Now, to mark word stress, we can draw a circle above the stressed syllable, or just highlight, underline, or put the syllable in bold. Now, some people can hear word stress quite easily and others can't. To help identify it, the first thing to do is to say the word out loud. So look at this word. Where do you think the stress is? Try saying it out loud. If you're still not sure, try stressing different syllables in the word. Which sounds best? If you're still not sure, you can look in a dictionary. So here's the entry in the Cambridge Learner Dictionary for considerable. Now don't worry about all the symbols here, the phonemes. We'll talk about those later. But just notice the little apostrophe. It's like an apostrophe. This is called the stress marker, and it comes immediately before the stressed syllable. Therefore, the stressed syllable is the second, sid, considerable. As well as stress within words, we also have stress that occurs within a sentence, and this is called sentence stress. So take a look at this sentence. Paul was meeting his friend at the pub. So which words do you think are stressed here? Listen again. Paul was meeting his friend at the pub. So the stressed words are Paul, meeting, friend, and pub. Now, do you notice anything about these words compared to the words which aren't stressed? So the stressed words here are content words. They carry meaning. Paul is the person doing the action. Meeting is the main verb, telling us what the action was. And friend and pub also have clear meanings and are both nouns. Now, adjectives and adverbs are also content words, and they're also stressed in sentences. So what about the other words? Was, his, at, the. These words are function words or grammatical words, and either don't carry meaning at all, or the meaning is sufficiently clear from the context. So therefore in English, these kind of words, articles, prepositions, pronouns, are not normally stressed. And in fact, they're squashed between the stressed words. Paul was meeting his friend at the pub. So notice how was, for example, isn't pronounced in full. It's was. And this happens because English is a stress-timed language. And that means there's a fairly regular rhythm to English. Paul was meeting his friend at the pub. Paul was meeting his friend at the pub. So the beats are the stressed words. Paul, meeting, friend, pub. And the other words are squashed in to keep this rhythm regular. Paul was meeting his friend at the pub. If we change it to Paul has been meeting his friend outside the pub, the rhythm or the time between beats doesn't actually change. Paul has been meeting his friend outside the pub. So why is this important? Well, many other languages are syllable timed, which means that each syllable has the same value. Paul was meeting his friend at the pub. Paul was meeting his friend at the pub. Now, that would sound okay in other languages, but in English, it now sounds robotic and unnatural. Paul was meeting his friend at the pub. So when teaching new language, students need to practice sentence stress in order to help them avoid sounding unnatural. So to do this, we can model the sentence, we can say it, and then get the students to repeat. We call this drilling. And again, we can also highlight the stressed words on the board in the same way as before. Now, there is another type of stress that is good to be aware of, although you won't necessarily need to teach it. Listen to this. Paul was meeting his friend at the pub. Now listen to this. Paul was meeting his friend at the pub. So what happened there? So the sentence stress was the same as before, Paul meeting friend pub, but I gave some extra stress to the word friend. What was the effect of this? Paul was meeting his friend at the pub. Well, it changes the meaning. It suggests a contrast. Paul was meeting his friend at the pub, not his boss. What about this? Paul was meeting his friend at the pub. So here we're stressing his. And this could mean Paul was meeting his friend at the pub, not my friend. So as I say, you won't necessarily need to teach this in a lesson, but it is something to be aware of. And when you're modelling language for students, when you're saying it, be careful not to accidentally add this extra stress for no reason. And this kind of stress is called contrastive stress or emphatic stress. Finally, we have intonation, and this is the music of English and occurs over a series of words. So take a look at this example. She's English, isn't she? Now, listen to the two ways I say this. Number one, she's English, isn't she? And she's English, isn't she? How does the change in intonation affect the meaning? She's English, isn't she? She's English, isn't she? So in the first sentence, my intonation goes up, which suggests I'm really not sure at all if she is English. In the second sentence, my intonation goes down, suggesting I'm pretty sure, but I'm just checking. Now listen to this. She's English, isn't she? Here the intonation is flat. What meaning does that convey? Well, to me it sounds like sarcasm. She's English, isn't she? So intonation can affect meaning, which is why it's really important to let students hear it correctly and then practice saying it too. Without this, students might inadvertently sound sarcastic or bored. So when appropriate, we should model the language with natural intonation and get students to repeat. Top tip, always provide a natural model. So what we've discussed in this video relates to teaching language, but it also more generally relates to how you speak throughout your lessons. It's important to always provide a natural oral model of English for students, and this means speaking with natural word stress, sentence stress, and intonation. If you speak like this, you're providing students with an unnatural model of English, and there are two key issues here. One, they'll copy it and start speaking this way themselves, and two, they'll expect people outside of the classroom to speak this way as well. So avoid this, speak naturally. What you can do is slow down. It's possible to speak a little more slowly than you would when talking to a proficient speaker of English. I'm doing it now, while keeping stress and intonation natural. Okay, let's now look at the individual sounds of English.